Support for this episode of Judaism Unbound comes from the Oshman family JCC in Palo Alto, California, whose vision is to be the architects of the Jewish future. The Oshman family JCC empowers you to experience Jewish paths toward a life of joy, purpose, and meaning through innovative Jewish learning and wellness programs, community building, and initiatives to develop the next generation of Jewish leaders. Learn more at www.paloaltojcc.org. This is Judaism Unbound, episode 313, Learning, Unlearning, and Onion Learning. Welcome back, everyone. I'm Dan Liebenson.
And I'm Lex Rofberg.
And as you know, if you've been listening to this podcast over the last few weeks, we are launching the second semester of our new Unyeshiva project. We're calling it a digitally driven center for Jewish learning and unlearning. And our classes are starting in just about a week and a half from when you're listening to this. They start the week of February 21st, 2022. So if you're listening to this podcast years later, hopefully the Unyeshiva is this huge thriving thing, and you, of course, know about it, and you don't need us to keep introducing it to people because it's the biggest thing in the Jewish world. But right now, it's actually just the launch of it, and we're super excited that we have gone from having only 2 classes in the fall semester taught by Lex and me to 4 classes being taught now in the spring semester, taught by Lex and me, but also by our 2 guests today, Keshira haLev Fife and Tova Birnbaum. So today we thought it would be a lot of fun and really interesting to have a conversation with now the 4 faculty members of the Unyeshiva about what our hopes and dreams for this project are. Before we jump into the conversation, just a couple of technical things. If you are interested even more in the Unyeshiva, you can check it out at www.unyeshiva.com. That's UNYESHIVA.com, or just go to judaismunbound.com/classes. You will also see there that you can register for a sneak preview session or an info session that is going to take place this coming Wednesday night, February 16th, at 8 p.m. Eastern Time, 5 p.m. Pacific Time, and all 4 of us are going to be there to talk a little bit more about our classes, to answer any questions that you have. We also should note that the cost of Unyeshiva classes is a sliding scale, and there is financial aid available beyond that sliding scale for those for whom that's unaffordable. So there's a form on the registration pages that you just fill out. And the last thing that I want to say is that we are understanding as this project grows that we have an increasing need of administrative help. And so we're really looking for somebody who is one of our listeners, somebody who's really passionate about the mission of Judaism Unbound, who is also really awesome at administrative things. And right now we're only talking about a few hours a week, but we're looking for somebody who really would love to do that kind of work, who's really good at that kind of work, and who has a passion for this mission. So we're not yet really kind of formally putting out a job description, things like that, because it's really not at that level yet. We're just realizing that we could use some help. So if you're a person out there who has those skills and you might be interested, please reach out to me at dan@judaismunbound.com, and we can have a conversation about it. So now let's jump into this conversation and to invite you into the conversation. So if you have thoughts beyond what we're talking about, or you want to add on, or you want to think with us, that is so invited. And we invite you to reach out to us and have that conversation in all kinds of different forums. So a quick introduction of our 2 guests, because they've been guests on Judaism Unbound before. Keshira haLev Fife is the executive director, or Oreget Kehila, of the Kohenet Hebrew Priestess Institute. She is also the founding Kohenet of Keshira Pittsburgh and the program director of the haLev Keshira Fellowship. She also works with the organizations Keshet and Beloved Builders. Her background also connects to the class that she's going to be teaching, called Shemitah, Putting Ourselves in the Practice. Keshira describes herself as a queer, biracial Jewish woman who believes that book, body, and earth are equal sources of wisdom. And our second guest, I really shouldn't say guest anymore, our second partner is Tova Birnbaum. She will be teaching a class called Being a Secular Jew. Her class also comes out of her story because Tova Birnbaum was born into an ultra-Orthodox community and grew up in a religiously observant home. But her journey subsequently took her into the realm of secular Judaism, and she was part of the founding group of the Binah Secular Yeshiva in Tel Aviv, where she designed secular holiday rituals and taught theater midrash. And she is now the director of Jewish content at the Oshman Family JCC in Palo Alto. Tova is a secular Jewish life cycle ceremonies officiant and a lecturer in Judaic studies. We could not be more excited to be embarking on this next phase of the Unyeshiva journey with Tova and Keshira, and we are more than excited to welcome them to this conversation today on Judaism Unbound. So Keshira haLev Fife, Tova Birnbaum, welcome back to Judaism Unbound. We cannot wait for our listeners to experience you as teachers and friends as we have. So welcome to Judaism Unbound. It is so great to have you.
So great to be here. Thanks for welcoming us.
Thank you for having me. Thank you. I'm excited.
Well, just before we came on, we sort of jokingly, but not jokingly, said this is the first ever faculty meeting of the Unyeshiva faculty, because I guess technically you could say that Lex and I had some meetings and we were the faculty for the first part, but I was kind of thinking about this, and I feel like the first semester of the Unyeshiva was a prototype, and we were just testing it out to see if this whole thing even works in all kinds of dimensions. And this semester, this expansion to have faculty members who are not us is whatever the next stage is after the prototype. I'm not sure what that's called. And it feels very moving to me to be having this conversation with you. I mean, I want to say to our listeners, like, we're not really performing here. We're actually having a bit of a faculty meeting where we wanted to, this is actually the first time that we've all four of us been together and have this conversation where we're really talking about what are our dreams and aspirations, both for this semester, but also more broadly for what I would love to hear from the two of you, what you hope that we will all build together, because we really haven't had quite that conversation before. So our listeners should know that you're listening in on the actual formative conversation and not some reenactment of it. So I guess I just wanted to start by asking both of you, we could start with you, Keshira, to just tell, why did you say yes to this invitation? What is it that you felt like, you're a very busy person. Why did you want to do this?
So many reasons. First, I'll just say publicly, thank you for inviting me. I can remember the early days of the podcast, listening to those first few episodes. In particular, I remember driving and listening to the crash talk with Rabbi B'nai Lappi and having to pull over for a minute to back up and listen to a few things that she was saying again. I remember being so wowed that folks were having such a bold conversation about Judaism, asking big questions and asking them in a way that could make its way into people's homes to inspire new conversations or deeper inquiry into this experiment or this project called Judaism. And I've long aspired to be part of the conversation. So it feels, it's gratifying, it's an honor to be here as part of this project. And also there's something really exciting that in this digital age, we get to learn with kindred spirits. It doesn't matter where they are, it doesn't matter what time zone they're in. Quite different from arriving to a local classroom where people are gathered in part because they're proximate to one another. We get to gather with people who have a shared interest in the topic and perhaps more in common from all corners of the earth.
First of all, thank you again also for inviting me to be part of this. This is really moving for me. You know, I listen religiously to Judaism Unbound, and I listen to the opening and I hear the Oshman Family JCC sponsorship, and I laugh when I hear it, because it's like, oh, it's talking about us, the Oshman Family JCC, but really being partners, thought partners, partners in crime, you could call it, in really reimagining Jewish life, and to be in conversation with all of you for a while about how can we reimagine rituals, how can we reimagine learning, how can we reimagine fixing the world together as Jews, all that, to take that to the next level and invite more and more people into the conversation is such a gift. And, you know, for me, approaching a group as a teacher, I always feel like I'm there to, first of all, to learn. Because if we gather around a topic, there's a mutual interest around the topic, for sure, there's so much we can enrich each other and teach each other. So just having that opportunity to join a circle of learners and teachers at the same time in this structure is really, it's a dream come true. I feel very, very honored.
I wanted to connect two things that you said. One, Tova, you talking about the Oshman family JCC, and it's so funny because every time I go anywhere, people think that I'm coming there from Palo Alto, and I live in Chicago. It's just very funny, and I'm always saying no, actually, they're a partner of ours, but I'm physically in Chicago, and it's really this digital age thing that I think people still are sort of trying to wrap their minds around, because they almost can't imagine how it could be that a person in Chicago is working with an entity in Palo Alto and with people. And, then it really blows their mind when I say that Lex lives in Rhode Island. And Lex and I, we used to say that we've only met in person a handful of times. Now we've met a few more times than that.
But 2 handfuls, 2.5 handfuls.
And not more than that. Yeah. So, and it's amazing. And Keshira, you were talking about just how part of the beauty of this, and it's more than beauty. I think you said that it was. It's just, how did you put it exactly? That maybe this is changing, but it feels that a lot of us who have a certain orientation to Judaism or a certain set of aspirations about Judaism, before the digital age, we were stuck if there weren't enough people in our local community who felt the same way, or we wouldn't even know how to find them. And so therefore, all of Jewish life was organized locally, and there were and are real valuable things about that we want to maintain. But there's also this possibility, and Lex has talked about this, is what if there was a new Jewish planet? What would be the institutions, right? And this idea that now we also live in this kind of parallel universe of digital space allows us to find our kindred spirits much more easily, powerfully, and now starting to form community with them. And to me, at least, part of the aspiration of the Yeshiva is the possibility of exploring what it looks like to be a Jewish community with people who are physically not together.
This is a very special moment for me personally, because, when I grew up, first of all, there weren't, those opportunities at all, obviously, but I also grew up in a very, very traditional community. So I many times imagine what would happen if I did have access to something similar to Judaism Unbound, or to be able to open a window to people who think differently, to other ideas. It took me a long journey, a very painful journey, to finally realize who I am, who I want to be, to find people that I have mutual language with about Jewish life, about spirituality, about learning, and so on. So, for me, I think it's like in Hebrew you say avodat kodesh, it's a holy work to really be able to amplify voices that invite diverse people to think differently, to express the diversity of their thought, and to be able to just to expose those ideas to the world and to invite people to be part of those conversations. I literally think that there are souls out there that their lives are much better because of your work, because of this type of projects.
Yeah, I am sharing the enthusiasm and excitement that everybody has expressed so far. And I want to bring the energy you're hearing in this conversation with 2 new faculty members. I'm still learning to say that phrase. We have a faculty at the Yeshiva. Wow. This is new. But I do want to bring a transitional kind of look back, look forward moment, because we haven't on this podcast said too much specific about what happened in this first semester. And what I can say is it was everything we wanted it to be and a bunch of things we didn't know we wanted it to be, but now in retrospect wanted it to be. But just going back to the 2 of you to hone in a little bit on that experience when we reached out to you. Dan asked, why did you say yes? I guess my next question is, given that you did say yes, what made you conclude the thing I'm going to teach, the yes I'm giving, is X, with Keshira's X being, Shemitah, and Tova's X being engaging with Judaism through a secular lens?
So I was in touch with Dan about the Anishiva for a while now. We spoke about this as a dream. And I shared with Dan that I know some people who have time and want to learn for real, to learn Jewish content for real and to go very, very deep, don't want to become rabbis necessarily, and are looking for a place to learn. I think we had that conversation maybe, more than a year ago, and we played with that idea. But really, it took me a while to think about the content. And one of the pieces that I'm exploring for many years now, personally and professionally, is secular Judaism. And it's extremely interesting for me to do it as an Israeli who lives in America and living with these multiple identities as very religious. I'm a secular Jew. I'm Israeli. I live in America. I encounter the religiosity of our culture all the time, and I question that all the time. So I work for a JCC in a certain way. A JCC could be kind of a secular synagogue. Sometimes I use that term, and I try to understand what that means. And I try to understand what is secular Judaism for American Jews. In many ways, you can say that most American Jews are secular. It's very problematic sometimes to use that terminology, and terminology is really part of the work that we're doing. And I'm hoping with the group that will join the class to also grapple with terminology, because we need good language for what we're trying to explore. But we're really trying to understand how in Judaism, that is not necessarily a religion, it is so many other things, right? It's a culture, it's a people, it's a nation. In Judaism, there are many, many core principles that work, not necessarily connected to God, not necessarily connected to observance, but there are positive elements that can be very, very rich for full Jewish life and also committed Jewish life as secular Jews. So I would love to invite the group to explore the history of secular Judaism. There's a very rich history from classical biblical texts into modernity, both on the side of secular Zionism that I kind of grew up with, and the American secular Judaism that is very, very rich. So we're going to look at different stories of how Jews saw themselves, but mostly think of ourselves. It's going to be pretty selfish in the end of the way. We're going to look for our own frameworks. We're going to look at how we want to shape our own Jewishness based on the material that we will look into.
I want to back up just a little and be in response to this idea that the two of us were invited not with any particular subject matter in mind, because I think that's an important thing to notice. That is a form of opening the gate, which invites the fullness of a person and the passion that's at our essence to come forth in teaching, rather than being prescriptive about the terms that we're coming on. So that was the first, I could feel the first blossoming of a yes when we began the conversation. And then, of course, as we began to talk about different ideas, I could feel the energy about what direction might we go in. And where I ultimately landed was on the Shemitah. It's, first of all, timely and not too late to get involved. Even if a person hasn't done anything to mark the Shemitah year yet, it's still very possible to do that. And part of the reason that I chose it is that if the Anyeshiva is centered around the concepts of learning and unlearning, it stands to reason that we're not only unlearning Jewishly, or we're not only unlearning things that we learned within a Jewish framework, but we could expand it and think about what might we need or want to unlearn in a cultural context or in a societal context. And the Shemitah is very related there. We cannot really engage with the Shemitah without thinking about the cultural messaging, the cultural expectations, various oppressions and intersections that impact how we live year in and year out. So that to me is a big question and a big sandpit to explore in as we're thinking about the principles of Shemitah and how we might apply them. The other piece, the other reason that I chose Shemitah is that you might have heard me say it, I might even have said it on this podcast at some point, that I grew up understanding that the Jewish people were the people of the book. And nobody bothered to tell me that we're also people of the body and people of the earth. Engaging with Shemitah helps us to remember that we are people of the earth, people of the body, and to reconsider, what does that mean? How do we deepen into our own body wisdom, into the wisdom of the earth, and allow that to inform our Judaism, not as secondary, but as or with equal value to the book and to the text. So of course, we will look at some texts and be grounded in work of our sages and looking at even some modern day sources as well. But there's also a deep invitation to bring our own knowingness and our own lived experience and our own yearning for how we might emerge from the Shemitah year. And so it's more than just a class. It's certainly not a frontal experience. It's really a conversation that invites each of us to perhaps unfurl and refurl, to deepen into this time of release and restore and return, so that we're fundamentally transformed.
I want to now talk a little bit about, sort of philosophically, what we can imagine, what we can dream about for a new kind of Center for Jewish Learning, and Unlearning. And I would really love to dream with you. And I want to do it actually in public, in part because I want our listeners and ultimately the students in the Yeshiva, maybe we need a word other than students, because I think it's a different kind of relationship than teacher and student that we're aspiring toward. So I don't know exactly what to call it, but I want to invite anybody who enrolls to see themselves as partly a creator of the Yeshiva and not just a student there. And so I want to invite everyone into this conversation. I'm thinking a little bit about what kind of learning would be a new kind of learning for the Jewish people, and one that will be the right kind of learning to take us into the next era. I gave this talk, an Eli talk, which is kind of like a Jewish TED talk, probably now around 10 years ago, if not more. And it was really all about disruptive innovation in Judaism. But it turned out that the foundation, the Avichai Foundation, which is now spent down and is not a functioning foundation anymore, they've done wonderful work, but they had these principles. And at the last minute, they told us that our talks had to connect to one of their 3 principles, which I can't quite remember what they were, but one of them was Jewish literacy. And the other 2, my talk didn't really connect to. So I was like, okay, I can make a connection to literacy. And what I ended up realizing was that when we think about literacy, especially in the Jewish context, I think people think about it as similar to how we think about reading. That literacy means that I can come to something that somebody else has created and I can access it. And I was trying, and I don't know how well I said it in the talk, I was trying to say, but there's another piece of literacy, which is writing. And I'm not interested so much in teaching somebody to read Judaism. I'm interested in teaching somebody to write Judaism. And in a sense, that's the most critical thing for me long-term for the Yeshiva. And that's as a project. It's not any individual class. I think about my own teaching or whatever we're calling it. I'm like, I have a limited skill set. There's some things that you're going to get from me, but it's not going to be that embodied stuff that you were talking about, Keshira. So I desperately want someone to take a class from me and from you so that they get the whole package. But I really would aspire that what we will build over time, that the people who take a bunch of classes come out of that experience and feel both themselves, they feel they can be a Jewish writer, meaning a Jewish creator. They are not holding themselves back. And also they have absorbed enough material that what they do end up writing will be compelling for themselves and for others as well. That's a heavy lift. And I'm not saying that all of that happens right away, but long term, that's the Jewish educational experience that I dream of.
I mean, I don't know that I've even said this to you, Dan, but my relationship to the Yeshiva is absolutely, and this might be intuitive to you and to others, it's absolutely related to my own experience in rabbinical school. And it's related both to things that I thought were good about my rabbinical school. This is, after all, a digital program. The program I did, haLev, is also a digital program. I would never seek to found any kind of yeshiva, or otherwise, that is offline. I don't think that that's my skill set in the same way. But it's also built around things that I didn't love about my rabbinical school. And that's not to say like haLev as a rabbinical school is like terrible or something. It's just, it's a rabbinical school, right? Like, and it's when you're training people to be a rabbinic leader. And by the way, it's not just a rabbinical school. It's also a cantorial school. It's also a place that trains other clergy positions, spiritual directors, rabbinic pastors. But like the content that I was engaging with, for the most part, was, I'm going to say, like, classical. It was from biblical sources, from Talmudic sources, from later codes, from, Hasidic literature, from the stuff that is, I'm going to use the word kosher. I mean, that's not really what it is. That is official in Jewish spaces. And I'm actually, as much as we are talking up the unlearning side, I'm really excited about a place with yeshiva in its title that is doing the learning part around Jewish stuff. And this relates to what Tova said with her framework of her secular Judaism. Like, I'm excited about a place that is treating sources of Judaism as not only the official ones and engaging in depth. And this, I won't say too much about my course yet, but sneak preview, I'm going to later. Like, that sees texts, in quotes, of Judaism being music, being food, being like all sorts of things that we are taught are like part of Jewishness, but are not usually the requirements that get you a rabbinical smicha. Like, I was required to take classes about Talmud. I was not required. I could if I wanted to, but I was not required to take classes about what might be deemed Jewish culture. And so I'm really interested in not only us, but other spaces creating, schools, pseudo-schools, institutions, pseudo-institutions, online, offline, where all of that is alongside one another. Because that communicates to the world, this isn't just like the cherry on top of the ice cream sundae that is Judaism. This is the ice cream sundae. And look, you could also, like, my classes are not going to avoid the classical stuff. They're going to absolutely have that too. But in many of mine, they'll be the cherry on top. And I like that inversion very much.
I want to say something heretical about Jewish learning. I am very suspicious of programs that invite you to acquire Jewish content, because then you will be X. You will be knowledgeable enough to do X. I want to suggest that Jewish learning is for the sake of Jewish learning and for the sake of finding meaning, personal meaning, communal meaning. But you don't need to know anything in order to create Jewish creation. I honestly think that this is the way our culture will get richer, that there is no threshold, there is no criteria that you can do X only if you learn that. And I heard that a lot growing up. Well, you didn't go to yeshiva like your brothers. You have not learned the 6 volumes of Mishnah and the full Talmud, so you cannot learn X, Y, and Z. There is a hierarchy and there is an order. You first have to learn that, and then this, and then that, and then you can access X and Y. And I really think that An Yeshiva and, in general, the general approach is that you can create Jewish content, you can create anything Jewish just because you want to, and you have something to say about it. And if you want, you can learn more about it to enrich yourself or to enrich your own activity. And learning from that perspective, saying, okay, I'm not learning to get permission to do something. I'm just learning because I feel that it would be good for me and for my journey. That's a good way to learn.
I'll throw some things in the mix. First, I have a personal mission to create spaces where people can say, I'm Jewish, without adding, but I also do yoga, or but I don't keep Shabbat, or whatever the qualifiers are that are really not our own voice. They're the voice of someone else who's invalidating or telling us that we're not Jewish enough because we either do or don't do whatever comes after the but. I think that's fundamental to what's happening here, because it allows people to arrive as they are with their Jewishness without any qualifier or criteria or threshold, as Tova said, to be eligible to come and learn. The other thing that I want to say is that my understanding of a yeshiva is that the word yeshiva is connected to the word yoshev, meaning to sit. It is a place where people come to sit and pore over the material, to be in partnered learning, to wrestle with the content, and that it can also be an unyeshiva, a place where we don't just sit, but where we move and be moved by the content, that the exercise is not to sit still until we've consumed, finish everything on your plate or there's no dessert, but to have the dessert first, to start with a part that enlivens us, not to get through all the stuff that's required of us before we can feel connected, but to start from a place of thriving, or a place of juiciness, or a place of conversation that at the end of 90 minutes we think, well, wait, where was the class? I was so deeply immersed in the material and in the conversation, I missed the boring part where the person was giving the whole lecture, right? That spoiler alert, there is no whole lecture. It's a funny thing to be part of a faculty. A faculty, it carries a gravity because of the cultural value that we have on academia and on universities, when in actual fact, as Koach Baruch Fraser reminds us, faculty is connected to facilitator. The job of the faculty person or the facilitator is to make the learning easier, or to make the unlearning easier, not to cram a bunch of information down people's throats, or to come and demonstrate how much mastery we have over the material, but to bring a picnic blanket and set out some things as a way to gather people around and bring some nourishment or bring some stimulus to a conversation, and then to hold the questions, hold the resistances, celebrate the vibrancies, and to engage with people. And in so doing, we're weaving the fabric, where we're creating new ways of being Jewish and doing Jewish.
Yeah, I probably said this in our other earlier episode about the Unyeshiva, but to me, I want the Unyeshiva, or I just want there to be in Judaism something that feels more like an art school. Now, I've never been to art school, so I don't exactly know how art school feels, in that what you're learning is not to sort of replicate art that somebody else has made, right? What you don't learn in art school is how to copy art. Now, you might actually go to a museum and copy somebody else's art as an exercise in art school, but the purpose is not so that you'll become an outstanding copier. The purpose is so that you will kind of embody, and this is where it gets to what you're saying, Keshira, about the embodiment and the standing and not sitting and the being actively part of the thing itself and not just learning about the thing. But to the extent that it is about an output, that's the output, that it's one where you feel that you are a person who can receive, well, I guess it's two kinds of things, the way I think of it, maybe even three. One is that you receive just a bunch of raw material and you feel like, oh, what I do with that is I shape it into some beautiful art or something cool. And if you put a piece of stone in front of a sculptor, they might say yeah, that's just a square piece of stone. It doesn't really do anything. That's not, and they start, and they, chisel it away and they turn it into something. And I feel like I wish, right? In a sense, I feel, blessed by what I often perceive of as bad experiences in my life. I feel blessed that I had experiences early on where I found a way. I've talked about it before. For me, it was Richard Elliott Friedman's book, Who Wrote the Bible, that allowed me to access the same material that I didn't like and to simply put that same material together in a different way and make something that I did like out of it. while we are critical of lots of Jewish things on this podcast, I've been so grateful when there have been reviews on iTunes or whatever that say, but the love for Judaism comes through. And I feel so seen in that moment, because I feel like it can sound like things, I'll speak for myself, it could sound like things that I say are harsh and that I'm always talking about things I don't like in Judaism, but that's always out of the love for what I do see locked within it that I only wish could come out, because I think that thing would have the gravitational power to attract so many people, so many more people than are currently even Jewish at all. And so again, what I'm sort of yearning for, and it starts to go beyond the Yeshiva as some kind of learning institution, right? It becomes maybe even, we can interpret Yeshiva beyond that even, right? Because it becomes a magnet for the formation of a community, and specifically a community that is oriented towards that process of sort of uncovering the Judaism that we know is in there, and that our expectation as a community is not that some genius should come along and present us with a Judaism that will be compelling to us, where we say, again, to a cliche, we're the change that we seek, right? That we are invited to come to this accumulation of thousands of years, and we're invited to sort through it and to create something that will be compelling to us. And if we do find something there that will be compelling to us, it probably will also be compelling to others. And that's, I just wonder whether, I wouldn't necessarily have said that it was an educational institution or a place of learning that would be the right seed for the formation of a new community that will address and access Judaism in that way. And I don't know whether it is or it isn't, but I hope that it is.
I also hope that it is. And I'm going to stream of consciousness a set of things that just came up from the fact that you invoked art schools, and the fact that Keshira was talking about the root behind the word yeshiva and sitting. I've been holding myself back because some of my Lex word plays are just a level of ridiculous that are too much even for pun lovers. This might be one of those, and so we'll see. But there's an art academy in Israel, and it is called Betzalel. And the name Betzalel comes from the part of the Torah that, as we release this episode, we're in. In a sense, it's the first collective Jewish experience of building an institution. Now, the institution isn't really an institution, but it's like the tabernacle. And Betzalel is a name that means in the shadow of God, which is a cool name. But there's a pun. The word for onion in Hebrew is Betzal. And so Betzalel is the onion of God. When I've told people I'm starting this thing called the Yeshiva, I've had a few say, wait, did you just say onion Shiva? What? It's a marketing thing we need to figure out, because we're an oral podcast and people hear us and we say Yeshiva and they think that's onion Shiva, because it's not like they're seeing a poster of us as their first interaction. So help us workshop that. But first off, we have precedent for invoking an onion, which is the onion of God, Betzalel. And so onion Shiva. But if we see it that way, all of a sudden it's glorious to me, because the word Shiva is 7. And I've talked about the number 7 100 times or 700 times on this podcast. It invokes a kind of completion. And I'm saying all of this because I think that there's something weird in the fact that in talking about this, Dan, you invoked an art school, because what people think art is about is what is completed, right? Is the painting on the wall. And what I hear you advocating for with writing Judaism as opposed to reading Judaism is that it's not about the thing that's completed on the wall. And honestly, even once it's on the wall, it's not completed yet, because it requires the person who's looking at that painting to then receive it and have it touch them in whatever way it touches them. And I don't know exactly how that's connected to onions yet, but at the very least, in my own generation's cultural corpus, onions are associated with deep layers because of the movie Shrek that says ogres are like onions. And I say the word ogre or onion to any of my friends, and Shrek comes up. And so my hope is that we're uncovering some deep layers of learning and unlearning. and that we do so in a way that resembles this guy Bezalel and the Torah, and that one day this incoherent rant feels more coherent than it was when it came out of my mouth, just like the Talmud does to us when it was incoherent at the time. But I do want to ask, like, Tova, Keshira, like, I'm really struck by Dan's metaphor of art and writing Judaism, reading Judaism. Did you have anything that you wanted to bring on that front in particular? And does it connect to the kinds of, I don't want to say activities, that feels like such a coarse word, like the beauty that will be happening in your class, the activities, the conversations of your class? Does that tie to this idea of writing Judaism, of creating Judaism?
What I like to ask the B'nai Mitzvah kids that I learn with, and we learn about building the tabernacle, and we learn about Bezalel, I like to ask them if they think Bezalel is a real artist. And the reason I ask that is because he needs to follow the instructions that are given to him by Moses, that are given by God. So he has a plan, he needs to follow that, and the question is that art? I don't know the answer to that, but I think it's a really interesting framework to think about the work that we try to do here, because we are engaging with some, as you said before, classical content, and we are engaging with some history and with stories, and we really are trying to be artists about them. We're trying to create meaning for ourselves. And I think that's really, when I'm imagining Bezalel, I know that he kind of added his own little things that are not in the original instruction, just to feel that it's also his own. It's his creation. And, one day we will figure it out, what exactly he did, what was hidden there that wasn't really from God. And I think that's really our place here, to add our little things and to find meaning. Betzal, it's such a rich image. Betzal, for me, when you mentioned Betzal, I'm thinking about how the Israelites in the desert kept talking about how they miss the onions and the garlic that they used to have in Egypt. It's like they're longing to this rich food that they had in Egypt. And it's like these things, it's like nostalgia in many, many ways, right? So we could do Jewish learning in a nostalgic way, but that's really the opposite of what we're trying to do, to access the material and to make it as current, as relevant, as deep and meaningful. So it's a very hands-on process. It's intellectual, it's spiritual, but it's also very, very creative.
It might sound counterintuitive. I think that the best way to enter into an Yeshiva class might be without any expectation of how you'll come out the other side. If I go to a workshop or a play shop that's centered around art, I already have a subconscious sense that I need to create something. It might not be a very pretty something by the time I'm done, but that there will be some output, even if it's just a mix of colors or a mash of clay. And I think what's happening here in some ways is that it's really about the experimental nature of working with the materials, if you will, of feeling the texture, being with our relationship to what does it feel like to create meaning and create understanding. I haven't worked through the metaphor entirely, but I think the thing that's coming to me most is that the intention behind a class or an experience centered around Shemitah is not that after 12 weeks, people are going to come away with a plan. It's that they will be able to look back over the 12 weeks and have had various experiences of interacting with the concept. And so what they will have to, quote unquote, show for it at the end is who and how they are as a result of having been there.
I think I've noted this before in the podcast, but I just want to note on the subject of the Shemitah that a while ago, Lex and I were thinking, we realized that the biblical year actually starts at Passover. So technically the Shemitah year does start in Rosh Hashanah, whatever, but we can make the argument that for those who, haven't really been thinking that much about the Shemitah or haven't been doing anything, that we could say, hey, you get a second crack at it starting at Passover. So that's around the time that these classes are taking place. So I hear you saying you don't have to come up with a plan, but if you want to come up with a plan, this would also be, okay timing. And Tova, what you're saying about the nostalgia, I think there is some fairness to say that a lot of the Jewish education that we have is a nostalgic form of education, which is okay if you're living in the place where we've been living for a long time. If we're in the wilderness and we're on the way to somewhere else, we do need a different kind of education. And the idea that we don't know yet what the different kind of education is because we're in a wilderness and not in the next place, it makes sense to create the temporary version of that, which is the tabernacle. And this is all very interesting, where I didn't know we were going here. Now, I think that I'm really looking forward. I don't know if we're going to do an episode like this every semester, but I think that I'm looking forward to the unfolding metaphors, the unfolding interpretations of the name Yeshiva. Hopefully, people who are listening to this are having the experience. That is so cool that it's in formation. I am so excited to be part of something that is in formation, because if you're not, then probably this isn't for you, and I say that with love. I think that there are people who really want stability and who really want to kind of know exactly what they need to know, et cetera, et cetera. And that's not what this project is about. What this project is about is an unfolding, and I'm excited to be doing that all together, and I'm excited to invite folks to do that with us. I wanted to turn a little bit to have a chance for everybody to say a little bit more about the specific classes that we're all teaching. And Tova, I wanted to start with you only because the term, and you talked about this, the term secular Judaism is one that American Jews don't always know what to make of. And sometimes I worry. I mean, I think you and I have been having these conversations for years, because I think we both define ourselves in some important way as secular Jews. But I think that a lot of people, when they hear the term secular Judaism, they hear some kind of contentless, meaningless. They're wrong to hear that, and the secular humanistic movement gets all upset. I mean, they're right to get upset. But I think that people when they hear secular, they hear sort of what it's not. They hear that you're saying it's not religious. We're taking the religion out. Well, what's left? Nothing, or very little, or bagels. Not that there's anything wrong with it. And I think that I would love to hear from you a little bit about what you're trying to get at, because I know that when you're trying to get at a concept of secular Judaism, you're imagining a version of Judaism that can be the most important thing in a person's life, and as important as any other source of meaning and wisdom in their life, but it's not religious. So can you explain that a little bit, and then what you imagine doing in the class to help people try to get at that?
So I agree that the terminology needs some work. Being many years in Israel and working in that field in Israel, we have a word in Hebrew, which is chiloni, which maybe is a better word. So we need to find a good word in English with no chet in it. I think that we need to find the positive ways to describe what we are and who we are, what is important for us. Living a full, committed Jewish life, with spirituality, with learning, with holiday marking, with repairing the world, all that deeply inspired by Jewish wisdom is what being a secular Jew is. And I want us to look at the origins of, really at different characters that either acted in the world or, either real characters or mythical characters, and then in modern times, people who wrote about this, very deep ideas and concepts of what it is to be Jewish in a secular embracing of the culture. And maybe a culture is also a good way to frame it, thinking of Judaism as a culture. And as I mentioned before, Judaism started being a religion just pretty recently. It has been a culture, it has been a people So I want us to go there and to see how we can find relevance in articulating in a positive way how we want to shape Jewish life in ways that work, ways that mostly basically focus on the rituals, on the learning, on the values, all that. It is so much. And finding inspiring sources that kind of give us more language would be basically our mission together.
Yeah, I'm excited about your class. I'm not taking it, Tova, but I'm excited to hear your reflections on it and hear from students taking it. I'm really excited for people, however they call themselves, secular, chiloni, religious, spiritual, not religious, religious but not spiritual. All of these, take Tova's class. I will say a little bit about my own, and then we'll hear from our other two faculty members practicing that. My class is called This Too is Torah. T-O-O. This also is Torah. And first, that quote is an allusion. It is not an illusion. It's an allusion to the Talmud, and it's an allusion to a specific section of the Talmud where some rabbis are talking, and one rabbi says, basically, I'm shortening it and paraphrasing, what you do in the bathroom is really, really important. And here's like a specific sort of procedure around how you should go about it, and closes it with, this is Torah. Like, this is Torah. The word in Hebrew is Torah. I'm not like taking some other word and translating it. It is a level of sacred that we would apply to Torah. And then we're not done. There's a follow-up with a different rabbi saying, yeah. Not only that, there's this guy who goes, it's very creepy, and this should only be taught in a very safe kind of way. But there's a guy who goes and literally hides under his teacher, his Rebbe's bed, and listens to his Rebbe having sex with his wife. And then the Rebbe catches him, and the punchline is, Rebbe, this is Torah. I must learn. This is Torah. I must learn it. The core message of my course is, there's a lot of stuff out there that people are telling you, and not you specifically, but everyone, are trivial. There are realms of society that we are taught and that we teach each other don't matter very much. They're distractions. Television. We do that to sort of depart from the world. We're in the world the rest of the time, and then we place ourselves in front of screens to distract ourselves. I think that's not what's happening. I think I am deeply building myself, not that I need it to be like a productive activity, but I think that that's not a true diagnosis of what's happening. Similarly, literature, similarly for me, sports fandom, similar for, like, go down the list. There's something in each one of our lives that we care a lot about, that people are telling us, wait, you care about that? Like, you read comic books? Like, I'm thinking a lot about the book Mouse, because recently there was this whole issue with Mouse being banned from schools. Like, for me, when the book Mouse, not only a notable graphic novel, a notable work of Jewish literature, forget just Jews. Like, this is a book that changed how people relate to literature by saying comic books, quote unquote, can be deep and serious and horrifying. We need to no longer be surprised that something like that affects us emotionally and deeply. That a comic book, which we've marked as trivial, affects us. That a movie affects us. I quote very regularly, there's been some articles in recent years, multiple, about how people watched the movie Yentl and then they converted to Judaism. People have written articles about how that movie planted in them a seed to feel called to learn more and connect to Judaism. I don't think that's an exception. I think that's actually how most of us work. And so in this class, we're going to be diving into all that stuff that we have not generally centered on the source sheet, on the little, set of quotes you learn in Torah study. And we're going to see what Torah lives there. And also, by the way, how it connects to like the capital T Torah that we're used to learning. And so I'm really excited to do that and to go into the realms of why Jewish food is sacred and what Torah is at a deli, why the television screen is sacred, why the book is sacred and not just the section of the library that's labeled religion. Like, all of that is what we're going to be unlocking. And I'm thrilled to share it with everyone. Keshira, tell us a little bit more about your class next.
In some ways, it's almost the opposite.
Amazing.
In that there are lots of sources that we could go to, which might be prescriptive or descriptive of Shemitah and how we might engage it. And the invitation here is instead to look at some very basic texts that give us the parameters, and then to go to the body and to go to the earth, to go to modern sources in order to derive what is the Shemitah in this time. What does it mean in this cycle? What are we rebalancing? What are we releasing, restoring, returning, in order to prepare ourselves for the next cycle? And ultimately, the question at the center of this can be read two ways. The first way is to ask, what do you need to let go? In this Shemitah year, what do you need to release? Another way to ask the question is with a different emphasis. What do you need to let go? What would it take for you to loosen the grip on the things that we hold so tightly? And why? Why does Jewish tradition teach us that this is imperative? How can we deepen our trust? How can we strengthen our communities? How can we weather times of uncertainty as a result of engaging in this practice? So I would say there is certainly an educational component. There's an invitation to explore sources of wisdom and sources of inspiration about how Shemitah is practiced. And there's also an element which is about reflection. That's why it's called putting ourselves into the practice. It's not the exercise of observing what are all the other people doing that I'm not doing, or how could I emulate what somebody else is doing in order to feel like I'm doing it correctly or I'm Jewish enough. But how do we claim it as our own, to remember I am Jewish? This is what the Shemitah is for me. And at the same time to know that the declaration, this is what it is for me, exists in constellation with other people. It's not enough to just do it ourselves. So that when we do it in a connective way, when we weave together, coming back each week in conversation, bringing the conversations to our home communities or to our families, that we're creating something real. It might not be new. It might be new. We don't know yet. But that there's value in our shared creation. And that if we bring ourselves fully to the task, it has potential to set us up well once we leave the Shemitah year.
Okay, so I'll round it out. My class is called Unreliable Sources, What Jewish Texts Really Say About Holidays and Practices. And my class is really, we're going to be studying a lot of texts together, a lot of ancient Jewish texts. In certain ways, it would feel like a typical class that you might have at a non-un yeshiva, at an actual yeshiva, where you just study a lot of ancient texts that come out of the most traditional books like the Torah and the Talmud, mostly the Bible. And I think, I'm sort of maybe overpromising here, that we are going to look at every single text there is in the Bible about the Jewish holidays. The reason I'm able to promise that, but don't hold me completely to it, is that there really aren't that many texts that are about that people are surprised to see how little is actually spelled out in the Bible. And so when we assume that things have always been that way, there are all kinds of reasons to challenge that assumption. I see that as a good thing. I don't see that as a bummer. I see that as a really exciting thing, because if we can see either the small amount of stuff that was in the Bible and compare it to the edifice that we have today, then we can actually see that sometime in the last 3,000 years, people built these parts of the edifice. And if they built it, then we can also build. And the other piece is, if we discover that there are things in the Bible that are actually opposed to the way things are today, we should think about what that means. And that doesn't mean that what we're doing today is wrong and that is right, but it means something. And actually, I just saw this recently in an article that was written by one of our previous guests, Barbara Tita, and she was writing in response to our circumcision episodes. And one of the things that she mentions is that a historian named Michael Stone said to her that, the thing that ancient prophets railed away against, that was ancient Israelite religion. If I study a text and I see that a prophet was really mad at the Israelites for doing something, then maybe that was actually the ancient Judaism, and maybe that is cool. Maybe the prophet was wrong. Another thing that jumped out at me recently, I was studying the Daily Talmud page, and there's a whole story in the Talmud tractate that we're studying now called Moed Katan. It's about the intermediate days of festivals. And anyway, it's talking about the festival or the celebration that King Solomon did when he inaugurated the first temple. And if you look at the dates, it's very clear that it means that he had a huge party on Yom Kippur. And the Talmud even is very clear about it, that there's no such thing as festivities without eating and drinking. The Talmud is crystal clear that there must have been food and drink at that festival. Now, the Talmud, then, I actually think this is a joke. I think the Talmud literally means this as a laugh line. But the Talmud then kind of, how could it be that King Solomon had a big party on Yom Kippur precisely the year where they were inaugurating the temple? And the Talmud says, basically, God canceled Yom Kippur that year. And that was why he was able to do it. And actually, a voice from God came and said, don't worry about it. You're good. You don't have to fast this year. And I think that the Talmud is either doing one of two things. One is it's apologetically covering something up. And the second is that it's covering it up sort of unapologetically with a joke. And I think the answer to this is that Yom Kippur did not exist in the time of King Solomon. And we can see that if we mine the biblical material carefully. We can actually see, of course, Yom Kippur is sort of mentioned in the Torah, but we can look at that in various ways and mine it and understand that it probably wasn't there at all. It probably was a late insertion. And if it was there, it was a profoundly different day than the day as we know it now. Once we do that, then the other part of the class, right? So the first part of the class is to mine the material and try to discover these things. Some of them are speculative. Some of them are more proven than speculative. But we are going to invite ourselves to mine the material to discover those things. And then the less sort of formal part of these conversations will be, once we've discovered these things, what does that mean? What does that make us feel, positive and negative? And also, what does that open up in terms of possibilities for what we might create today? Could be because we want to actually double down. We want to go back to what the Bible's version was. Maybe we want to go back to what the Talmud's version was. Maybe we want to look at what the Talmud was trying to do by creating a new holiday. And we can think about, do we still have those same needs, or do we now have different needs? And maybe we come out of that and saying, hey, we really like the idea of Yom Kippur. It's a really important day, but we're going to start to observe it in a very, very different way. That might come out of it. It might not. We don't know. And I don't have an agenda in that. I'm not going to be suggesting the new way that we're going to be observing the Jewish holidays. And it's not just holidays. It's going to be some other rituals. The class, hopefully, will be coming up with ideas. And then I think people will leave the class and maybe they'll do things differently at home for the next year and they'll report back. Who knows? But that's the idea for this class.
So that's a little bit of a window into our 4 courses. First off, please, please, please come to our sneak preview of this spring semester, where you'll be able to ask follow-up questions of each of the 4 of us, determine which class might be the best fit, or if all 4 of them, you're going to just fill your life with Anya Shiva courses. That would be cool. But we hope that you'll be there. And if there's other questions, please send them our way. But we are so excited for this semester. And Tova, Keshira, thank you so much for helping us make it a reality. We're so psyched to be pioneering the Anya Shiva with you.
Thank you so much for including me. I'm very proud to be part of the Anya Shiva faculty. I think I'm going to quit my day job and just join all 4 classes. It just sounds amazing. So really, congratulations, Dan and Lex, for the amazing work that you do.
It's such a pleasure to be with you all. I really enjoyed this first faculty meeting. I hope we get to do it again. And really, really looking forward to the learning and unlearning ahead.
We are also so looking forward to it. I know I speak for Dan when I say that. I certainly speak for myself when I say that. Come to our sneak preview. If you're listening to this episode right as it is released, the release date of this episode is February 11th, 2022. You can come to our sneak preview. It's on Wednesday, February 16th at 8 p.m. Eastern, 5 p.m. Pacific. We would love to explore these classes a little bit more with you, give you a little taste. You can ask questions directly of each one of us if you have questions. You can also ask just overarching questions about the future of the Yeshiva if you're curious. So we hope to see you at that sneak preview. And if you miss it and you want to consider these courses, please send us an email and we will send you the recording of that sneak preview so that you can stay in the loop and consider which class or classes you want to take this semester. So thank you so much for listening to this faculty meeting. And we hope that you'll continue listening to our podcast in the future. And let us know what you thought of this episode or of any of our other episodes in all of the following ways. First, there is our Facebook page, Judaism Unbound. Second, there's Twitter and Instagram. All of those are at Judaism Unbound. You can go to our website, judaismunbound.com. And the third way is that you can email us at dan@judaismunbound.com or lex@judaismunbound.com. We really hope that even if you don't come to the sneak preview, you explore these courses on our website, which you can do by going to judaismunbound.com/classes and dive all the way in. So that's our notes for the end of this episode as it relates to the Yeshiva. The last thing that we'd say is, of course, we deeply appreciate if you are able to support us financially, and you can do that on either a monthly recurring basis or just as a one-time gift via judaismunbound.com/donate. So thank you so much for listening, and with that, this has been Judaism Unbound. 226 more days of Shemitah.